All right, class. First off, as always, good day. I'm glad you're here. So today we're going to be going over the basically the second part of the Great Depression. Now, before we went on break, we talked about the first part, how basically the bubble was created and how the stocks of things just collapsed, how there was a drought going on, um, how banks basically lent out money, but they didn't have any money to give back to the people who wanted their money back. Um, so things were getting chaotic. And today we're going to look at how the chaos continued. Okay. So for the objective, we're going to do this last two parts where it says examine the effects of the Great Depression had not just on the United States, but the entire world. It did have a ripple effect. And again, this is why it's known as the Great Depression. It didn't just hit the United States, it hit the whole world. And also, we're going to create an argument on which part of the experiencing the Great Depression was worst. So it's not just the stocks crashing and some of that. There's a lot more to the Great Depression than just that. Okay. So here is your warm-up picture. Now, if you notice up on top, there's that bigger guy with his hand up like this. It says on his vest, big business. So that's who he represents, is those big businesses, doing well and some of that. Now, if you notice on top, he's saying something to Uncle Sam. Okay. I'm sure you can read that for yourself. Okay. And if you look at the picture on the bottom, it's the same guy, but he's a little different. And he's even saying something different to Uncle Sam. So, my question to you is this: what's the difference you see of how he is on top there in 1929 and how he is on the bottom in 1932? So, what's the differences you see? So, again, talking physically, what he's saying, more likely his mannerisms, you know. So, again, like I said it in class, if you put something down like, I see a guy with his hand up and I see a guy coming through the door, you're not getting your points for this. Okay. Again, I'm not asking you what you see, I can see myself. I'm asking you what's the difference between how the guy is on top and how he is on the picture on the bottom, his mannerisms, what he's saying, things like that. Okay, that's the question. Okay, and again, if you continue to just write down whatever you want, you're not going to get the points for this. And that's why a lot of those of you who don't answer these questions fail this class, because you do not answer the question I'm asking. You just decide to write whatever you want. So, again, if you're one of those people, I've said my piece. That's it. For those of you guys who always do your stuff, you always answer the questions. I do apologize. It just has to be said. Okay. So, with that being said, pause the video, write your response if you haven't done so already, because we're moving on in three, two, one. All right. So, the Great Depression, basically, now people have lost confidence in not just the banks, the money industry, the government. I mean, everything. People are don't want to spend their money. They're holding on to their money because they know, hey, I need this to pay for food, rent, some other stuff. Nobody is buying furniture. No one is buying, luxury clothes and things like that, new watches and stuff. No, nobody's buying that stuff because, you know, things are bad right now. All right. And with that being said, too, nobody's investing in the stock market. They lost confidence in the stock market. Again, people were putting their life savings into buying stocks that they thought were going to be worth hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands, and things like that. And now they're worth nothing. You know, and because people are stopped buying things like furniture and some of that, these factories basically slow down. And then some of these owners were looking around going, why do we have these like 10 workers when none of them are doing any work? Why? were just paying them just to stand there. So they fire them. They start firing people left and right. And there were some people who were like telling their bosses, "Hey, I'll take a pay cut, just don't fire me. I need this job." Sometimes they were kept on. Sometimes they were like told, "Hey, sorry, nobody's buying something from our store. No company is buying our product. You know, we got to let you go." But those people who took pay cuts and stuff like that, they knew that it's better to have some money coming into their household than to have nothing at all. Okay. Now, a lot of Americans were focused on the necessities, food, rent, things like that. And again, when they didn't have money, they had to go on credit. Now, before we went on break, I did say that a lot of people did owe money on credit at different stores and stuff like that. At grocery stores, some people would have a credit of like $100, $150. Now, some of those people, hey, the grocery store would tell them, hey, you have to pay me some money. You have to give me something so you can shop here. But if you don't, we got to kick you out. You know, and those people who still had a line of credit, their credit dropped down from, let's say, $150 down to like maybe $20, because these grocery stores wanted to make sure they at least got some money. They didn't want the people just buying, 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 and oh, just put on my credit, just put on my tab. No, hey, $20. That's all we're going to allow you, because we need money to buy more food. You know, um, and those people who bought things on credit, like furniture and some of that, all those things got repossessed. People came in and they took those furniture back, clothing, cars, whatever they bought on credit. Okay. Now, like I said, this was not just limited to the United States. This was a world event. Now, you have to remember, especially in Europe, they were just getting out of the war. The United States was investing money into Europe. And now that they took their money out, Europe was hurting. And now, with the money basically being worth nothing, it hurt even more. Because you have to remember, this is something that a lot of you guys don't know. Back in the day, you could take your dollar bills and say, I want, say you had $100,000. You can go to a bank and government, whoever, and say, I want $100,000 worth of gold, because our money was backed up with gold. Okay, that's how a country was. Their dollar bills were strong because you could back it up with gold, because that was based on the gold standard. We don't have that anymore. Okay, but that's how it was back in the day. Um, and because a lot of countries around the world were going through the war, some of that, they were spending money. Some people were printing more money, so their dollar bill was worth less. Um, it really messed up the whole gold exchange, the currency exchange. So yeah, it made things even worse economically. Okay, and especially in Europe, because again, that's where the war was happening. A lot of countries there were rebuilding and stuff like that. Now, the US president at that time, Herbert Hoover, along with other world leaders, tried to encourage people to just, like, you know what? Hey, yes, this is a problem, but you know what? Things will get better. This thing is going to run its course. These business people who are who basically got us in this financial mess, they'll get us out of it. That's what these business people do. They're smart. They'll figure it out. And in reality, no, they only are looking after themselves. They don't care about fixing the economy. They don't care about fixing the world and the country. All they care about is them. And that's, again, one of the big things you should take out of this whole lesson about the Great Depression, is that business people, they only care about themselves. And this was proof positive right here. Now, in the 1930s, there were 4 million Americans who couldn't find jobs. Now, I mean, when they couldn't find jobs, it wasn't like, oh, well, I applied to 4 places and yeah, they're not that good for me. I don't like those places. No, I mean, people were desperate to get any type of job. But like I said, factories and businesses, they couldn't hire anybody because they didn't have any money. So 4 million people in this country were looking for jobs. The next year, that number jumped up from 4 million to 6 million people. So imagine 6 million people all around our country looking for jobs anywhere they could find it. Okay. As long as they got paid. So the production, meaning factories and companies making things, basically dropped by half, even more than half, actually. So yeah, things came to a standstill. There were so many homeless people who couldn't afford to pay their mortgages, couldn't afford to pay the rent and homes and stuff like that, and homelessness just rose like crazy. Not just in little tiny towns and stuff like that or big cities, everywhere. And like I said, people would basically get on trains, hitchhike, whatever, to go from one place to another around this country looking for jobs, looking for, someplace they can start over. And a lot of people wouldn't find it. Now, in a lot of places too around the country, especially in big cities, there were soup kitchens and bread lines. These are places people can go line up early in the morning, in the evening, and get a little bowl of soup, as you can see in these pictures right there. If you look at that cup, the guy has a little piece of bread on there. You know, that's was their meal for the day. And like I explained in the other classes, the reason why they gave people soup was because soup is primarily made of water. And it's a lot easier just to add more water into a soup. Now, a lot of times these places they would get like a neck bone from a cow or whatever, they would put it in the bowl or in the soup, so that the marrow and stuff it's like a broth, you know. And they might cut up some little vegetables here and there, some tomatoes, carrots, or whatever, and toss it in there. But again, it wouldn't be a lot because again, those types of vegetables and stuff like cost money. So they would cut it really small, put it in there, and people ate that they got a piece of potato. They were happy. Okay. Now the other thing with bread is, if you don't know, you get this yeast, right? Flour, water, and you know put some heat to it. It will rise because the yeast will start eating the flour and some of that, and the bread will rise. So you can actually make a lot of bread out of a little bit of yeast. And that's why they gave bread. Because bread, if you've ever eaten bread just by itself, a couple slices and you're feeling pretty good, you know? That's exactly why they had soup and bread, because it's cheap and it filled people's stomachs up. So here's the thing. Mother Nature just picked the wrong time to act up. Because the thing is, like I told you guys before we went on break, there was a big drought also happening during this Great Depression era. And as we explained before, plants need water in order to grow. Okay. And so these farmers who had these large plots of land, these big, you know, uh, plantations, they didn't have enough money to pay people to pick crops. And some of them tried to say, hey, if you pick so many crops, you can take some of that as like payment. But some of these guys were like, these crops are bad, they're horrible, and who's gonna buy them? Oh well, then you can eat them. Well, I mean, again, they're bad. You know, so a lot of people just they didn't work for the farms. So these farmers who had these huge plantations basically had to go pick it themselves. And um, thing is, a lot of that crops was left rotting because they couldn't get all that crops. They couldn't pick it in time. You know, even if they had a family of like 15, 18, they would have a bunch of people working for them, years before, you know, 40, 50, 60 people, and a family of 12, they're not going to be able to do that work, and especially if they're not used to it. They're not used to, bending over, picking cotton, some of that, and cotton, like that stuff stabs your hands. So if they're not used to it, they're not going to pick it. Okay. Now in the 1930s, this was again the largest drought in the middle of the country. And any of you guys who ever walked on like desert land, you know that ground is hard as rock, right? Because it's so dry. But also, you would see like a fine dust or powder above the ground. That dust you see, that's actually topsoil. That's the nutrients that plants need in order to grow, in order to, you know, absorb the nutrients and stuff in the ground. So when that ground gets hard and dry, all that nutrients, all that stuff comes up to the top and it makes this fine powder, like a kind of like a sand. Okay. Now this is where things, like I said, Mother Nature just really is a big bully at this point. Because large and heavy winds came out of the Rockies and pushed all this topsoil to the East Coast. Okay, it lifted all that dirt in the air, and that's where you see in this picture. That's not fire. That's not smoke. You see in the background. That's dirt. Yeah. Some students in class were like, "It looks black." It's like, yeah, because that dirt is so thick when it covered up these, cities and stuff like that. It basically turned night or day into night. It made an artificial nighttime. Okay. Um, and also, like I said in class, some of you guys, probably did this challenge when you were younger, the cinnamon challenge. Now, if you ever did it, you know that when you put the cinnamon in your mouth, you usually coughed up all the cinnamon, right? And the cinnamon that came out, that was dry, okay? But the cinnamon that was still in your mouth, that's stuck to your tongue, your cheek, anything that had moisture, because that's what happens when these dry stuff attaches to moisture. It thickens up like kind of like a mud type of stuff. If you don't believe me, just get some water, get some cinnamon, put the cinnamon in, and the cinnamon will like separate. But if you try to mix it in, it'll get like muddy. It'll get thick. And that's exactly what happens when these crops, no, sorry, these crops, these cattle, cows, goats, sheep, when they breathe in that dust, it clogs up their nose, clogs up their throat, and these animals suffocate. People can just do this, cover up their noses, still breathe in air, and the sand would hit right here. But cows can't do that. Pigs can't do that. And if you ever seen pigs with snouts, it's all wet. So all that dirt's gonna attach to itself to it. And when the pigs breathe in, all that dirt's gonna attach to the inside of their nose, inside of their throat, and it's going to clog it up, and they died. Now, some of this dirt went all the way from Texas, started in Texas, and went all the way to where like North Carolina, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, it to the Atlantic Ocean. It traveled. It's estimated at 350 million tons of soil kicked up from the ground and covered basically the central and eastern part of our country. Now, a student in class asked me, "Well, what about the West Coast?" We were fine because remember that air, that heavy winds came from the West Coast over the Rockies and into the Great Plains. So Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, South Dakota, places like that, right in the middle. All that dirt just picked up from there and just covered the whole East Coast. Now, with this happening, a lot of people were like, we need to move. There is nothing for us. They're trying to find a better life. So some people migrated to like Colorado, Idaho, um, New Mexico, Arizona, but the promised land, the goal a lot of these people had was to get to California. Now, in the fall of 1930, the banking panics really start to kick up. Okay. Because again, remember, people want their money from their banks. They're like, hey, I put my money in there. I want my money. And the banks were like, well, we lent out your money. And those people who we lent out the money to, they're not paying us back. Since they're not paying us back, we can't give you money. Now, that's how banking was. But again, these guys don't care. They don't care. They want their money. And it's because of that, confidence in the banks just shrunk down. I mean, to almost nothing. People who had money didn't want to invest in banks because they saw them as like, oh, you guys are one of the reasons why this whole thing is happening. You're one of the reasons why the financial situation's the way it is, you know. And on top of that, again, people wanted their money. They're like, I'm not gonna put my money in your bank, but I want the money I put in there already. I want that now. So another banking panic happened in the fall of 31, again in the fall of 32, the winter of 1933, and basically banks all around the country, thousands of them, just basically closed their doors. They're like, sorry, no one's paying us. No one's giving back our money, so we're at to close our doors. Sorry. So things were getting really, really bad. And again, remember, banks make money when people give them money, and then those banks lend out money to other places, you know, farmers, biz people who want to start a business. And then when those people, you know, pay back the bank, then the bank makes a profit from the interest. Okay. Problem is, when the banks, if someone takes out a loan from them, they can sell those loans to other banks, other investors, and stuff like that. If they need money quick, fast, and in a hurry, they'll say, "Hey, this guy owes me $10,000. If you give me 10,000, I'll give you this loan." You know, then that person will owe you 10,000. You know, uh, so at this point, nobody is buying any loans. No investors, no banks, no companies, nobody. Because again, everyone's like, no one's gonna pay back these loans. Everyone's just worried about having enough money to pay the rent, buy food, things like that. Now, President Hoover, he's like, I got a plan. I got a plan. Okay. This is what we're gonna do. We're gonna give money to the banks, right? Then the banks are gonna lend out that money to people to start businesses or to farmers, to buy more land. And then when those businesses and farmers start making money, they can then hire people, and then they'll you know uh, give the money back to the banks. The banks will then give the money back to the people, and then those factories and farms will hire people, and those people have money, and things will be hunky-dory and perfect all over again. That was a lot of wishful thinking, and it did not happen. Basically, the banks lent out money to people, sure, but those people never paid back the banks, and the banks never got the money back. Because they never got no money back, they still couldn't give people back the money that they originally put into the bank. So that plan failed horribly. All right, so that's the end of this lesson of the Great Depression Part 2. Okay, next class we're going to be talking about when a new president comes in, what does he do that's different from President Hoover, and you're going to see if things get better or worse. Okay. Um, so with that being said, guys, you take care, you be safe, and I'll see you guys later. Okay.